the only people who actually enjoy accounting reports are the accountants themselves, whereas the entrepreneurs and the business owners, not necessarily, So if you can have an accountant, if that entrepreneur can have an accountant that can actually put some context and some narrative behind it, it actually makes it less intimidating. And I think that's also where data visualization comes from as well, that a picture is much more palatable than, a 40-line spreadsheet.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining me, Chris, on the next episode of Be The Drop. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Now, I know that you've got your item of significance, which is going to kickstart the interview, and that's something that connects you with your community. So if you could please share the story behind it.
Yeah, sure. So my piece of my significant item is a book called Startup Opportunities, and I think the book itself isn't necessarily significant, but it's, I suppose, the author who is significant, which is Brad Feld. And I got a signed copy of it, actually sent to my office a couple of weeks ago. In terms of the backstory behind that, I've been a big reader of pretty much every single one of Brad's books. And I think one of the most important ones that I read very early on was called Startup Communities. And that was when I just sort of set up Startup Adelaide Incorporated, which was the not-for-profit for startups here in South Australia. And Startup Communities by Brad Feld was really kind of like my guide for, how to kind of put this all together. And then, every other book that he's put out, I've obviously, consumed and has been really useful in terms of, me and my business and that sort of thing.
Obviously, startup is a passion of yours, and you started your own business. So perhaps just give us a little bit of insight around your business and the startup process that you've gone through there.
Okay, so I started, I suppose, not my first business, but my first legitimate business, let's say, about 6 years ago. It was just an accounting firm called Cirillo Hooper and Company. The reason I started that was because I always wanted to go into business. I didn't do accounting because I wanted to become a career accountant by any measure. I did accounting because it's the language of business and it was super important for me to get a grasp of in terms of my, entrepreneurial skill set. And I suppose I started getting bored by around 22, 23 of like just accounting life. And I'm like, I want to go back into business. Now, I spent probably a year procrastinating on it, waiting for like the next, Apple or Google type idea to kind of like land on my head. And that obviously didn't eventuate, and I kind of got bored, and I just said to myself, it's like, you know what, just go into any business. And I think I just went, well, what can I do? What can I make the most money in? Where are the most opportunities? And I said, you know what, I'll just start an accounting firm. And at least be in business while I'm figuring the rest out. And it was after 4 years in that business that kind of that big business idea did hit me on the head. And that was Accodex, which we started 2 years ago. And basically sold Cirillo Hooper and Company, built up Accodex, and have been running with that ever since.
Yeah, and so Accodex, you've built it up and you've built it internationally. Yeah, so where are you now?
So we're in 4 different countries. So Australia, the Philippines, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And we're in a few different sort of cities and states, across those 4 countries as well.
Yeah, and obviously from here, head office.
Yeah, so headquartered in Adelaide still, and that's the intention sort of forever. So long as I can, I'm in charge and, we can manage it. But yeah, you know what, so far so good that it's about 40 or 50 people now, across 4 different countries. And we seem to be doing just fine, managing headquarters from Adelaide.
And you've always had a slightly different approach to accounting anyway. I remember when I first met you in Majoran, and I think my first thought was, I'm not sure if he's an accountant or a hip hop artist. Like what's going on? But you definitely speak different language than other accountants that I've, spoken with and that sort of thing. Is that something that you think helped you with that, being able to see this different business model for accounting?
Yeah, I think so. I think it comes back to being an entrepreneur first and an accountant second. But obviously being an accountant by trade, understood the movements sort of in the market and the global competitive landscape and where the opportunities were, you know. In the early days at Cirillo Hooper and Company, we'd gotten quite lucky in terms of picking market winners in terms of software. And that garnered us a lot of competitive advantage early on in the business. And I sort of thought to myself, it's like, well, if I can actually predict the future of the accounting industry, you know, in a repeatable fashion, then there's going to be some big upside associated with that. Obviously, I knew that my peers were going to go, well, says what? Says who? What do you have to support that? And that's why I kind of took that approach straight from the get-go, from a data perspective. And it says, you know, computer says that this is the future of the profession. You know?
Yeah, well, that's harder to argue with.
Correct, right.
So, you know, what you're talking about, running business and then creating a new business model, that's really hard work, you know, and it's quite risky and challenging. What is it for you that motivates you to just keep doing it, you know, and rather than just stay in the lifestyle type accounting firm?
I think it was because before I'd quit my job, I had accumulated enough in superannuation to kind of know that I was going to be fine come retirement, right? And I use the analogy like it's having you know, a lotto ticket, you know, a winning lotto ticket, but it's like forward dated, so you kind of can't cash it for 40 years.
Yeah.
And then, you know, but the outcome is guaranteed. So then it's a question of, well, what do you want to do for those 40 years? You know?
But you've chosen quite a challenging one, you know, like, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So what keeps you doing that? Like, you could have an easier option, but why is it that you go, well, I'm gonna run, you know, build a new business model and take it internationally?
Yeah, right. Because I do say that I wouldn't, you know, recommend this lifestyle to anyone on the face of the planet. You know, I don't look at money as a means of buying things or a means of status. I kind of regard it as a way of keeping score. You know, as if it's a video game, and you know, then it's like, well, obviously you want to try and get the winning score or at least a top score, right? So outside of doing it for the lols, because if it was just for fun, I'd be in any other business. But I think I'm specifically anchored in accounting now for the rest of my life, simply because I understand the importance of it and I want to leave a lasting legacy in the profession.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And so around this, you know, as you said, you've got accountants who, you know, they're feeling uninspired as well. So that, you know, I suppose that means they're open to a new business model. And you've built this new business model, but how have you gone about building the community around it and really communicating that? Because it's something that's different and new. So that's always challenging in itself.
I knew no one really in the American accounting industry except like one or two people. So I emailed those people and I said, who are the most influential people in the accounting profession in North America, you know? And it's a pretty easy, you know, question to answer, and they all emailed me back with a sort of top 5 list. Then I obviously like looked them up on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on that sort of stuff, and then started reaching out to those people and just connecting with them on social media and then chatting with them on Skype or whatnot. And then obviously, you know, visiting America for that very first time, connecting with those people. But then when I'm there, you know, going, you know, I'd tell my story and then I'd ask, I'd wrap with the question, is there anyone else you think I should be talking to? You know, and provided you've made a good impression, you usually get like a whole raft of, you know, introductions to other people in that area that you should connect with. And then I think, you know, more and more that kind of compounds over time. And yeah, I suppose it just becomes this, you know, movement, I suppose.
Now, you mentioned there, and I think you've done it a couple of times, Twitter and LinkedIn. So for you, are they the platforms? Is that where your conversations
Absolutely,
are?
So like Facebook, I do look at sort of from a personal perspective. It's kind of like a public diary type thing. I use it there, like Facebook, from a timeline perspective to sort of anchor specific career milestones and stuff that I want Facebook to remind me of this time 3 years ago and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like a public diary in that respect. Instagram, I still just don't get, you know. I'm contemplating like just shuttering that. I have nothing good to photograph. And
it's a very visual platform. And I know we did talk about visual storytelling in your numbers, but I don't know how many graphs are going to work on
exactly.
Instagram.
And yeah, I suppose LinkedIn is much more professional. I won't post on there as frequently as I do, but I do use it as my main blogging platform. And I will do some like very business accounting centric, status updates. But Twitter is really my main go-to, and I think the content is mixed 50% with me, posting, like as in just tweeting, and then 50% is actually like engagement, replying, interaction type stuff. I remember someone once told me that Twitter is the world's biggest cocktail party, and I've kind of taken that philosophy.
So for accounting,
Yep.
and also obviously you work in that startup entrepreneur
Yep.
business sort of space.
Yep.
You're finding that that's really those two platforms.
So I think the thing with accounting is that everyone's on LinkedIn. Yeah, in the accounting profession, like you're going to be 99% certain that every accountant is on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
They may not be checking it every single day, but they at least have a profile there.
Yeah.
But I think the engagement on LinkedIn is getting like higher and higher, especially with the updates to their mobile app.
Yeah.
And I think the people in terms of like accountants that are on Twitter, it's really the people that are influencing the accounting market that are on Twitter.
Yeah.
So not every accountant is going to be on Twitter, because if you are just like a CPA, that's 30 and practicing at a big firm, you don't necessarily have an imperative to be on Twitter, right?
No.
But obviously, if you're a speaker in the in the accounting arena, if you're an author, if you're a blogger, if you're whatever other type of influencer you could be, all of those people are on Twitter, and I talk with them every single day now.
Yeah.
There's no way that I, on my own as an island, can actually affect change in the accounting profession or in the Adelaide startup community. But I think through a community of like-minded peers that have similar interests and motivations and aspirations, that's when you can actually start distributing like big, powerful ideas through that network.
Yeah. And so, what has been the biggest challenge in this process? Can you pick one? I love the way you laugh there. Right. I'm like, okay, so there's a few.
Yeah, of course. I think in terms of building the business, it's probably all the usual kind of startup stuff that you go through. I think if I were to summarize it, there'd be two things in terms of building the business. The first one is kind of this stop-start momentum that you get in a startup company. And I think that's very much noticeable, especially in Australian startups, where you'll push forward, you make a little bit of revenue, make a little bit of money, and then you have to pump the brakes, and then you have to build some infrastructure and some capacity, maybe hire some people and that sort of thing. And then you'll go, oops, I've spent too much money building infrastructure and capacity. Yep. Now I've got to go make some more money, and then you'll grow too quickly, and then you'll have to build some capacity. So like the revenue growth chart kind of looks like this, right, with steps. And that gets very tiring after sort of 6 years in business, because for me, all I want to do is just go a million miles an hour without sort of touching the brakes. And that's very difficult to do when you're actually trying to bootstrap and you're constrained by capital. And I think the other thing in terms of, I suppose, challenges is about the managing the emotions in business. I think, if you looked at, my emotions as an oscillator, right? And then you've got the highs where like this is great, and then you've got the lows, this is awful. In the earlier stages of business, it's kind of it's a wavy curve, but like, sometimes the best thing will happen to you, and then 3 months later, the worst thing will happen to you. And then you'll get another career defining moment 3 months later. And then as you get further and further into business in terms of time, but then also the size of the business, what I've noticed, and other entrepreneurs have confirmed this as well, is that the highs get higher and the lows get lower, but then also the timing or the frequency gets condensed, right? So you go from like this 3 month high-low cycle to like, a 1 month to a 1 week to a 1 day to, these days I feel like every day is, the biggest best thing that's ever happened in my entire career, and also the biggest worst thing that's ever happened in my career every single day. And I think trying to actually manage that and not kind of let it get to you and not get distracted, that takes a fairly high degree of resiliency, I think. And I'm not sure if that can be taught or whether it's, just in someone's DNA or conditioned from childhood. But that's why I wouldn't recommend this life to, my worst enemy, is because, I think without that resilience, it gets very difficult to actually manage.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating though. You wouldn't recommend it, but I don't know. Would you do anything different?
Well, this is the thing. For me, the only reason I'm doing this is because it's kind of like genetically programmed, you know. I joke that I'm unemployable, more or less.
Yeah.
That I don't think I could be doing anything other than this. And it's probably like some sort of mental health disorder, right? Where I have this compulsion to kind of like abuse myself, you know, with respect to sleep and, you know, emotions and that sort of thing. But like as much as I hated at times, like I wouldn't be doing anything else.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. But I've got one last question.
Yep.
I'd like for you to leave us with Chris's Be the Drop tip. So that's your top communication tip.
My top communication tip, I think, probably comes back to LinkedIn, surprisingly. I got asked once at a lecture I gave at Flinders University, Chris, you know, this lecture's been great, but how do you distill all of your career advice into one sentence? And that sentence was to build the most epic LinkedIn profile that you possibly can.
Right.
Because I think in pursuit of building an epic LinkedIn profile, you actually have an epic career, you know, as a byproduct of that. So I remember quite specifically like honors and awards, you know, I was looking at that section and it's like, oh, I don't really have any. Maybe I should go find some. And then I started searching for awards in the accounting profession and there was a whole raft of them. And I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to actually, you know, position myself to win those awards?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I meant in terms of you have an epic career.
Yeah.
Because if you start looking at the blank spots on your LinkedIn, then I think you start chasing things that are ultimately good for your career and good for your business.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice.
Thanks.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.